With long exposure time lapses, the number of frames captured can often be limited by how long the camera battery will last, as obviously a 30-second exposure will drain the battery more than one taken at 1/1600th of a second. Also, the more frames that you can capture with shorter capture intervals allows for more fluid motion. So to ensure that I can get as many 30-second exposures as possible, I often have in-camera noise reduction switched off in order to capture as many frames for the time lapse as possible. Because with long exposure noise reduction switched on, the camera takes a second dark frame, using it to remove hot pixels and image noise from the captured photo, which means a 30-second exposure would actually be 60 seconds, so a longer interval would obviously be needed. Obviously, with noise reduction switched off, it means that some captures can be prone to random image noise, which changes from frame to frame during playback. But in general, depending on how good the camera performs at higher ISOs, any image noise may not be all that noticeable when watching the clip. Of course, how bad any image noise depends on the camera's sensitivity, ambient temperature, where during the colder nights the effect of image noise can actually be reduced, and finally what ISO is used. ISO 6400 can create more grain or noise compared to ISO 3200 or 1600, again camera dependent. I find with my Nikon D610, which is a full frame camera, I can get away with ISO 6400 when using an f2.8 lens. And with my Nikon D7200, which is an APC camera, I can get away with ISO 3200. One of my methods to reduce hot pixels or reddish image noise during the video editing phase was to duplicate the clip and place it above the original edited clip. I'd then add and set the channel blur filter to the above clip and set that clip's blend mode to pin light. I found that this method helped smooth out the random noise during playback. Otherwise, I'd darken the black in the image to try and hide obvious areas of concern in the shadows. This method is quick and dirty, but it can sometimes work well. Then I heard about Topaz Denoise AI. Denoise AI was great working on single photos, and one thing at first that I liked about it was that it offered editing of the original RAW file, which was then able to be saved as a DNG image after noise reduction. I thought this was great, as I always strive to keep as much color data as possible throughout my editing workflow. So I went ahead and purchased Topaz Denoise AI when it was on sale after trying it out on one night lapse, which showed it did an excellent job of sharpening as well as cleaning up the frames of the time lapse. Being able to batch import, process and export a capture sequence was crucial for me. But I did find some downsides to the software. My first issue with the software is that while it does batch process RAW files, it seems to save them as a TIFF file contained within a DNG container format. So the file sizes that are exported are enormous, which isn't practical for storage, especially when you're limited with storage. And also because I'm not able to maintain a true RAW workflow throughout, it can be limiting with edits. The second issue is the time it takes to batch export. This is the biggest drawback to Topaz Denoise AI, at least for me. It can take almost a full day to batch process 700 frames, so not ideal for quick turnaround jobs. Also a definite run it over the night type of thing, and plan to work around it while I wait. Keep in mind that the type of noise reduction and relevant settings used, as well as the input-output file formats, will have an effect on processing time. I have to revise this, as when I did these timings, I was new to the software and also in the middle of chemo treatments, so I wasn't clear-headed at the time. The timings I provided is from Denoise AI using the CPU only, which is what it's set up for by default. I have since realised that you can set it up to use your GPU, which does speed up things at least by half. So using the GPU, 657 TIFF photos took just over 4 hours at around 22 seconds per frame. When using the CPU mode, it was 59 seconds per photo. Denoise AI recommends performing noise reduction on the original RAW file first, and then edit later, which makes sense to edit a clean version at the beginning of the workflow. However, as mentioned earlier, it seems to save it as a TIFF image contained within a DNG file, which makes adjustments to the white balance limiting in Lightroom, just as if I was editing a JPEG image. So for my Lightroom LR time-lapse workflow, there's no real benefit to working with Denoise AI in this way. So when I have the time in the storage space, I will be using Denoise AI to help clean up my high ISO time lapses, because it does do a decent job of it. Using Denoise AI, my workflow will be to edit the sequence between Lightroom and LR time-lapse to smooth out exposure transition changes. Then export from Lightroom as a 16-bit TIFF, then in Denoise AI set up the noise reduction method and batch export as JPEG, ready for video editing. Again, keep in mind that the Denoise batch process can take around 20 hours for 750 images if you're using your CPU, and around 10 hours if you're using your GPU. So it's a definite overnight job, but that's working on my laptop, which I guess isn't the fastest machine out there, so your times will vary. But I will say it is worth the time and effort. Denoise AI cleans it up fairly well, and I found the results are better if you don't overdo it. Less is more sometimes. When choosing the noise reduction method in Denoise, I found that while they all do a great job, I ended up choosing low light as I feel this is the manual option that would work better with a time lapse. Mainly because I noticed when using the AI methods, they seem to introduce artifacts on certain areas on the image, such as straight lines were sharper, or there was some edging happening on the top of mountains, or piles of grass didn't have a natural shape. I suspect that the AI component may be prone to adding detail that it can't distinguish clearly. My video editing method is to use a Lightroom edited JPEG sequence as the main clip, then overlay a Denoise AI edited version above that on the timeline at a slightly reduced opacity. The aim of which is to use the original edit to add any detail or sharpness to the video if I felt it was missing. I just like to have that kind of control. Then I will color grade an adjustment layer above the two video clips, choosing a suitable blend mode and opacity value until it suits my liking.